We are once again destroying the facilities of the Russian oil refining complex and eliminating war criminals. Austin in Ukraine, Trump tearing apart Moscow, Putin destabilizing Moldova. Valeriy Klochok, head of the Vesha Center for Public Analysis, is with us. Valerie, glory to Ukraine. Glory to the heroes. Congratulations. We attacked Novoshakhtinsk, so far Rostov region. Around 3 a.m., the Novoshakhtinsk oil refinery was attacked. Locals reported at least 5 explosions. Official Rostov reported the downing of 11 drones. No fires were reported, but the very fact of such a preemptive strike tells us something. Valery, can we say that the attacks on the refineries have resumed? This comes as Pentagon Chief Lloyd Austin arrives in Kyiv for an unannounced visit. I am not going to give specific expert assessments of the intentions. I want to testify that the war is moving into a phase of confrontation between technologies, and unmanned aerial systems will play a greater role. I have come across reports from my military experts who communicate with my colleagues, and they even note that the role of tanks in this war is already diminishing. For example, they cannot maneuver as they used to because of the threat of unmanned systems. Even an inexpensive drone, as we already know, can destroy a multi-million-dollar tank, other armored vehicles, and so on. Regarding drone strikes against Russia, we have noted in recent weeks very serious attacks by Russians on the territory of Ukraine. The number of Shaheds they are launching is measured at more than 100 every night, and the duration of air attacks has increased significantly. This indicates that Russia is scaling up its production and trying to attack various targets in Ukraine, exhausting Ukraine's air defense system. We are also trying to respond, and I hope for parity. Last night and the night before, we recorded that the Russian Armed Forces destroyed more than 100 drones. In particular, they flew to the Moscow region, and Moscow Mayor Sobyanin reported that there were shoot-downs there. We don't know how many exactly, but they hit, and so on. We know that there were flights over the Lipetsk 2 airfield, and there was also a flight over a plant that produces explosives for shells. As for the refineries, we are restoring them. I really hope that we will be able to launch more drones across Russia. If this is a priority for the authorities today, I welcome it, because the previous days were not marked by major attacks on Russian territory from Ukraine. I would like to see such attacks accompanied not only by drones, but also by missiles. Yesterday, 2 missiles were shot down in the Kursk region, as reported by Russian telegram channels. I understand that Ukraine lacks resources, financial and industrial. It's hard to say how we can increase the production of drones, because the strikes should be more massive. I hope for positive trends in the future. But there is one caveat, friends. The Russian army is developing quite rapidly, adapting to war. Yesterday, the commander of the U.S. forces in Europe, General Cavalli, even spoke about this, and he emphasized that at the end of the war in Ukraine, he said, "We will have a more modern, more developed army than at the beginning of Russia's war against Ukraine." That is why today it is a challenge for us and for the whole world to see how quickly we adopt technology, how quickly we adapt to new challenges on the battlefield. Indeed, there are more drones being destroyed by the Russians on Russian territory, which means that fewer of them are reaching their targets. We see this, and we would like to see more. This is not a question of condemning the armed forces. I emphasize this because it is a statement of fact. I am more than convinced that the military is aware of this, but when we don't see any more videos of outbreaks at certain airfields, we have to understand that the situation is very dynamic. By the way, General Cavoli writes that the dynamics are really too great. For example, the North Atlantic Alliance is not ready for this at all. He says that this is a serious challenge for the alliance, that they have to develop faster than Russia, and he emphasizes this. That is why I hope that Lloyd Austin's visit is related to these issues, and not just some other issues that are not very pleasant for us. Oh, Valerie, we cannot allow the Russian army, as Cavoli warns, to become stronger and stronger after the war in Ukraine. No matter how it may sound, we are working to ensure that it is still depleted and not as powerful as they want it to be. This will then give them the opportunity to further scale up their aggression. The war criminal Dmitry Galenkov was killed in Russia. It means that we have already accommodated his Cargo 200, as a matter of fact. He is a war criminal involved in the attack on the Amstor shopping center in Kremenchuk, which killed 22 people, as well as in a missile attack on a residential building in Dnipro on January 14, 2023, which killed 46 people, including 6 children. Its elimination is a signal to everyone else. There is no longer a safe place. While international institutions are working on the creation of a special tribunal, we are working to ensure that they are punished on this planet as well. I emphasized in my morning briefing today that this may seem like an ordinary event. According to the General Staff, over the past 24 hours, the Ukrainian Armed Forces killed or injured more than 1,700 Russians. That is, these are the killed and wounded. And this figure is really incredibly high, because I personally do not remember when there were numbers over 500. It was extremely rare. Now it's 1,700. We are moving steadily towards 200, which of course does not make me happy. It only means that the scale of the war is now increasing. But against this backdrop, the news of the destruction of a war criminal who directly controls the aircraft that launch missiles into Ukraine and kill civilians is a very, very attractive story for Ukraine and for Russia. I can just imagine for a second how this incident is being discussed in his unit, because some of the Russian pilots will now be thinking about whether or not to fly, whether or not to launch missiles. I understand that this will not be a serious signal for everyone, and the Russians will not be frightened quickly and will not take to the controls of airplanes or fire missiles at the country, but it is still a very good call. I would like to recognize, friends, the work of the main intelligence directorate in this regard, because as far as I know, this is really their work. And I have only one wish, that such incidents on the territory of Russia would be more frequent. What should be done for this? I can't advise and give advice now. This is the job of our intelligence officers and the authorities. But sowing panic and chaos among the military in Russia is the #1 task that needs to be done now. Because, for example, North Korean troops will be in Ukraine, I have no doubt about it. They are already undergoing training in Russia and will carry out massive attacks, which is a big problem for Ukraine. North Korea has the resources to mobilize. I hope the world will react to this. Today, the UN Security Council is planning a meeting on cooperation between Korea and Russia, while the UN Secretary General is flying to Kazan for the BRICS summit. I'm sorry, but it's important to note that the destruction of highly skilled military personnel on the territory of Russia who fly aircraft can be a serious challenge for them. This is a big problem for us, especially because of the shelling. I would like to point out that the number of missile attacks has decreased recently, which may be due to stockpiling, reduced production, etc. Russia is preparing for the winter to attack the energy infrastructure in Ukraine. There are many options. If we destroy highly qualified specialists who fly aircraft on the territory of Russia, it will cause panic among the military and become a big problem for the Russian army. Training such pilots is a long-term endeavor, unlike simply dressing up a North Korean and giving him an assault rifle. This is a loss with a symbolic effect that can sow panic and scale. It also deals a blow to the Russian army, and such losses should become an everyday reality for them. For us, it boosts morale and gives us pleasure.
Неочікуваним доволі таки візитом. CNN про це нам повідомило. Зустрінеться з президентом України Володимиром Зеленським, з міністром оборони Рустем.
Lloyd Austin, the U.S. Secretary of Defense, has made a surprise visit to Kyiv. He will meet with Zelenskyy and Umerov to discuss a victory plan. Should we expect any unexpected statements as the U.S. elections approach on November 5th? I don't know why I came to Ukraine until now, friends. This is really unexpected for me. I talked about this today in my I emphasize once again earlier video. We have a lot of events happening in Ukraine, both pleasant and not so pleasant. For example, today Zelenskyy announced a meeting of the National Security and Defense Council of Ukraine to discuss corruption schemes used by employees. The corruption deals are just crazy. Millions of dollars that are found, in cash from these leaders. We have a lot of disabled people, prosecutors, and so on. This is against the backdrop of Zelenskyy's attempts to attract support from the Western world. Perhaps this will become a topic of conversation regarding the victory plan that he has already presented in Washington at the 79th UN General Assembly and at the EU summit. I do not exclude that perhaps Lloyd Austin will discuss some specific practical steps to implement it. It is important that we have the opportunity to implement some of its provisions right now. But there have already been many comments today that we will not be authorized to strike at Russian territory until November 5th. There is still no unity among our partners regarding our membership in NATO, and the situation is still unclear regarding other points of the victory plan. There are very diverse responses, very controversial responses to its implementation. But Lloyd Austin's visit to Ukraine itself is, in my opinion, very, very significant, because first of all, it was not announced. Of course, we have had cases in the past when leaders of many countries have come through without any warning. And I do not rule out the possibility that this visit is connected with the end of Joseph Biden's term. But we still need to remember that Joseph Biden will continue to fulfill his duties for at least 3 months after November 5th. And until a new defense minister is appointed, of course, America feels obliged to continue to provide assistance to Ukraine. In this regard, I can tell us all good news, thank God, because according to preliminary information, the United States of America has agreed to join the program of support for Ukraine within the framework of a $50 billion loan. This was agreed by the G7 countries, and they promised to provide $20 billion. In addition, President Joseph Biden has unfulfilled commitments to use funds from his Presidential Assistance Program for Ukraine. Lloyd Austin will probably now find out in more detail on the ground what specific assistance the United States can provide. The President of Ukraine has promised, but not every week, large aid packages, given that we are to receive from the United States of America in the near future, by the end of this year, aid in the amount of about $6.8 billion. Various information is now being reported in the media, and it is clear that Lloyd Austin's visit is very important. But it is difficult for me to say what specific issues will be discussed, because we really have a lot of problems. A lot of comments are about what will happen after the U.S. elections, which is a big challenge for Europe. I link Joseph Biden's visit to Berlin to possible developments in the United States. Against the backdrop of a rather complicated election campaign, where the U.S. society is actually divided in half, with half supporting democracy and half supporting Republicans, the U.S. is facing a serious threat of internal destabilization. A Democratic victory could lead to discontent among Trump supporters and accusations of fraud, as was the case in 2020 and during the storming of the Capitol in 2021. If Donald Trump wins, we will see the strengthening and concentration of power in the hands of the newly appointed Republican administration, which will try to implement Project 25, as it is called today, where they will transfer more powers from the states to the center. This will definitely lead to discontent in the United States. So the challenges there are serious. Thinking back to the level of unpredictability that Trump's arrival could bring, many questions remain. In an interview with the Wall Street Journal, the former U.S. president spoke about his intentions and threats.
Посилаючись якраз на слова екс-президента США, він розповів в інтерв'ю виданню свої наміри, свої погрози Путіну.
He threatened Putin with a strike on Moscow. Trump said, "Vladimir, if you go after Ukraine, I will hit you hard. I will hit you right in the center of Moscow." I would not want to do this because I am friends with Putin, but he said he would have no choice. Is this talking about the past tense or the future? How much reality is there in these threats from Trump? There are often questions that have no answer. I understand that you are not the one who generates this news, but when people say to me, "What are you saying?" I say, "Listen, I don't generate news. I'm not the government. I'm helping you to understand the complex labyrinth of the information space that exists in the world." In Ukraine as a whole, you may or may not share my position, but we are not shaping the news, at least not yet. Trump is shaping it. Trump shapes the news, well, often. And most often the news that is extremely difficult to explain in terms of logic or otherwise. And perhaps, a very vivid indicator of this is the movie that is now being shown in Ukrainian cinemas called The Apprentice, which reveals the essence of Trump. Who will watch this movie now depends on how it is filmed. This film really reveals the essence of Trump, i.e. his unpredictability, his management style, his willingness to make empty promises, to utter phrases that have absolutely no connection to reality, and then not to explain them. Trump is a politician who is not responsible for his words. This will not change, regardless of whether he is president or not. Trump was already president and could make adequate decisions. However, none of his projects have been successful. The reason is, firstly, that he is like that, and secondly, the U.S. foreign policy strategy involves risk management so that Americans do not get involved in war.
Чому? Тому що, по-перше, він сам є таким, а по-друге, в інституції Сполучених Штатів Америки і стратегія США в зовнішній політиці якраз передбачає управління ризиками в усіх куточках світу.
Let's be clear. In this part, Joseph Biden has successfully implemented this strategy during his term in office because he is deterring Russian aggression, deterring even Chinese intentions to fight, North Korean intentions, and so on. But during this entire period, not a single U.S. soldier has been killed in the war in Ukraine. Not a single one. Not like in Vietnam, Afghanistan, or Iraq, for example. This is a real success for the United States. I do not rule out that Donald Trump will continue the same policy. When he talks about going after Moscow, it's absurd. He will never do it, but his voters like it. Now we are seeing military exercises around Taiwan that have no end in sight because Trump promises that he will solve everything. He can act either by striking at Moscow or by reaching an agreement with Putin. I do not understand the logic of the Trump voter because it simply does not exist. Trump has not had a single successful business project. Most of them ended in bankruptcy. They talk about the success of his house, but all the projects were either given away for debt or ended in failure. It's a complicated story. Trump is an extraordinary personality. I cannot deny it. Indeed, he has made himself, he is popular, he has found supporters, and so on. Trump shows the flaws in the society of the United States and other countries where politicians come to power on empty slogans and implement their policies. This is a problem not only for the United States, as such slogans are used in other countries as well, which leads to suffering. We need to take into account this bitter experience. When Trump promises to strike at Moscow, we realize that he will never do so. I don't think that Russia will make any convenient statements about the fact that the former U.S. president and future possible candidate is threatening to hit them with a missile. For some reason, I don't have such grounds to draw conclusions. Of course, I could be wrong. Perhaps they will release a statement today, but I will say no. And at the same time, when he says, I'm going to hit him, he says, Putin is my friend. So how do you reconcile this? Putin is my friend, but I will hit Moscow with a missile. To do what? To stop him from giving Ukraine a nightmare, to make him stop. This uncertainty. And then we will somehow gloss over, as we do, Trump's lack of any sane strategy for ending the war in the world. He said that he would disarm North Korea in due time, but it ended in nothing. The only thing I can see behind Trump's intentions is to really lift the sanctions pressure on all countries. It's just a disgusting idea he has. It's a complete nonsense. Because if you take into account his huge interview with Bloomberg that he gave a few months ago, I did a detailed analysis of it in my own place. I've already talked about it on your show. This is a programmatic interview with Trump where he specifically talks about what he will do as president of the United States of America. One of his intentions is protectionism, imposing heavy tariffs and lifting sanctions against Russia, Iran, and so on. But the fact that he is going to bomb someone there, well, friends, it's not Trump who will be sitting at the controls of the plane. We have to realize that it is not Trump who will be releasing bombs, but many institutions that govern the United States. I doubt that Trump will be able to implement all his plans because the decisions will be made by the Congress and the Senate. We should not blindly believe his words that he will restore order. Many of Trump's supporters in Ukraine believe that he will be more decisive than Biden. I really wish they weren't mistaken in this regard, because when they use this as an argument, Trump gave Ukraine weapons, not Biden. Trump transferred weapons without the right to use them. We also have long-range American missiles that Biden handed over. I am asking you to pay attention to ignorance. When they claim that Trump has done something great for Ukraine, both Biden and Trump have made many mistakes, but both are acting in the interests of the United States. Institutions are designed to maintain peace, develop the economy, and reduce casualties among the U.S. military. We must realize this and look for common ground. With the Americans to improve our security and deter Russian aggression. Europe is concerned about the prospects and is trying to provide Ukraine with additional funds to create a security cushion. They realize that a Russian victory over Ukraine could lead to a war in Europe.
Щоб Росія не змогла здолати Україну, бо для Європи це завтра війна в Європі. І повірте, європейські чиновники чудово.
But Europe and America are not the same thing, unfortunately. It was the same, friends, during the Second World War. Because let me remind you, Winston Churchill did not get the United States to enter the war from the first call. He traveled to the United States of America twice in person and met with President Roosevelt to persuade him to launch the Lend-Lease program. The Americans joined the war when they realized that they could destroy Hitler's Germany, including military aid. It was not an easy process, but their foreign policy was consistent. High but vain hopes lead to even greater disappointments. It is necessary to realize that a second round of elections in Moldova is unavoidable, as no candidate, not even Sandu, has gained the required 50%. Sandu is in the lead, but the issue of EU accession remains uncertain, with support at around 55%.
Лідирує Санду в першому турі, вступ до ЄС під питанням, нібито 55% близько того все-таки проти. Санду, президентка Молдови, заявляє про
Moldovan President Sandu claims unprecedented electoral fraud and third-party interference, arguing that a fair political process did not take place. She cites evidence that criminal groups, working with foreign forces, attempted to buy 300,000 votes, which points to Russian interference. The situation threatens Moldova, as Russia benefits from destabilizing the country. Friends, I have my own vision of Ms. Maya Sandu's position here. I respect her European orientation, yes, but when it comes to governing Moldova, she has made a lot of mistakes. To me, this is a complex topic, a big one, of course. First of all, the lack of decisiveness in resolving the Transnistrian issue. For example, after the start of the large-scale invasion, it could have initiated these processes. The loyal position on Transnistria is understandable, but not everything depends on it. Although Russia's influence in the region is diminishing, Transnistria has been a cancer for more than 30 years, since 1989. After the large-scale invasion, Moldova has a unique opportunity to solve this problem.
Вона має таку ракову пухлину у себе в країні вже понад 30 років, тому що історія з протестуванням розпочалася в 89-му році.
The fact that she tried to turn a blind eye to it, in my opinion, made a difference. The turnout was lower. Even from Transnistria, voters were not transported to the polls. There were many such cases, but the amount of Russian money that was thrown into these elections is very huge. Of course, she had to understand that this practice was also in Ukraine, and unfortunately, it still exists. In Ukraine, it is also noticeable that pro-Russian forces are rearing their heads. This is absolutely obvious, so we had to be more decisive in countering Russian propaganda and so on. But unfortunately, this was not done, which led to the division of society in half. This, in my opinion, is the most terrible story for Moldova today, exactly the same as in the United States of America. Sandu has 50% support for joining the EU and 50% against, which for me is even more alarming than the fact that she did not get a majority in the first round. She was hoping for support, so she mentioned fraud, but has not yet recognized the results. Moldovan society is really divided.
Вона не сказала про це. Як будуть розвиватися події, далі подивимося. Але молдовське суспільство реально розділено. Навіть на папері.
She can't say that there are no people who oppose her opinion. There are, and it's not just, Republicans and Democrats competing in what kind of America should be more democratic. Here, on the contrary, there is a story. Here, Putin's supporters and Maya Sandu's supporters are talking about what Moldova should be, European or Russian. That's how the question stands. We should continue to monitor the elections. I wish Sandu would be more supportive of Moldova's European and Euro-Atlantic integration so that the country does not repeat the path of Georgia and Belarus. The topic is really large scale, so we will continue to discuss it on the air, focusing on important points. Sometimes you have to be more decisive in your behavior. We are saying this about us and about our Western partners, including Sandia. Thank you for the conversation and your analysis. I look forward to seeing you on Wednesday. Have a great day. Goodbye. Valeriy Klochok, head of the Vesha Center. Almost 1,500 leave likes and comments. Subscribe to Valeriy Klochok's YouTube channel. The link is in the description below the video, as well as to YouTube 24. Please take care of yourself and believe in the armed forces of Ukraine. See you, and let's win.